All right, so the process of recording an album. So whenever I'm approaching producing an album, I guess I always really break it down into 4 stages of a process. When we're doing pre-production, which is a phase before we even get into production. Pre-production is preparing and all these elements of dealing with the music and how things are going to happen in the studio. So the more you can be prepared, the better the studio experience can be. And you're in a different environment. You can be uncomfortable in certain ways because you're really looking at things very closely under a microscope, and you're listening in headphones and in different rooms sometimes, and so it can be a totally different experience. So to me, it's really important to really get an understanding of what's happening with the music before we even get into the studio. And once we get into the studio, then we look at these phases of production. So when I'm working with a band and producing an album, the first thing that I like to deal with in looking at the first phase of production is really what I like to consider a mixing phase. And mixing a lot of times we consider to be the point where you've already recorded everything and you're dealing with the sounds, you're dealing with the context of the music together. But really the first thing that we do is actually mix, because when you come into the studio, you're bringing in instruments that maybe need to be tuned. So when we begin a session, artists will load in their equipment, we set everything up. To me, that's one of the most crucial stages that we work with, actually, because it's a setup stage, a stage that we look at shaping sound and shaping the tone of what we're going to create in producing an album. And what that means is the instruments, whether it's a guitar amplifier, drums, horns, there's the sound of an instrument, the sound of the room that we're capturing it in, there's the sound, how the microphones capture it, and all the equipment that we plug in, all the outboard gear, the way it's captured. All these things need to be dialed in and need to be dealt with as far as what I like to call mixing. There's that whole entire first stage that's really all about getting sounds and textures and mixing that you have to sort of work your way through before you even hit record. This next stage that we look at when we actually start to hit record and we actually are recording music is a performance stage. And tracking, overdubbing, recording are these terms that we're technically doing, but really, to me, it's all about capturing energy. It's about performance and about first of all, getting group performances out of everybody and getting sort of that magic that happens when you're having a great concert or you're having a great practice in the studio, and capturing that in the studio. Even when we're overdubbing, doing solos, or working on single vocals one at a time, it's just really important to capture that energy and capture great performances. So we do a lot of things to really make the environment as positive and as conducive as we can. We like to call these windows of creativity, where we can capture these moments because all of them get pulled together into what becomes hopefully a great work of art. So there's all kinds of things that we end up doing when we're trying to capture those windows of creativity. Creating a mood, really making sure that we're in an environment that feels great. I think great experiences equate to great performances, great recordings. So we may be setting candles. It's important that all lights have dimmers, that we can constantly kind of control the texture and the mood of a room. I definitely am thinking cinematically too when producing an artist, because you end up sort of creating textures with light, and even just the aesthetics of how things are set up around you really can change how you feel and how you're energized to perform. So when we actually hit that mixing stage, the classic sense of mixing, where we're done recording, we're done tracking everything, and we're now doing things with effects and just creating the sound and mixing the album. If we really treated that first stage as a mixing stage, that setup and getting sounds and everything, then we're able to pull up a mix real quickly, and there's already a great rich sense of how everything fits together. So at this stage, now it's really taking all these things that we've sort of mixed individually and created these tones for, and making them all fit together and fit within the space that exists. I mean, we're kind of confined to, of course, limited frequency response and 2 speakers that spatially this stuff can sit between. So really we're creating the depth, we're trying to make things come in and out in front of the speakers as far as how we hear and feel things. We're trying to get them to even kind of go beyond the speakers and create sort of this three-dimensional space between high and low frequencies and sounds and textures, and getting everything to fix. And sometimes that means, you know, carving out spots and room for things to sort of work together and fit together. And at that point, everything really just kind of comes alive and comes together. So that's your classical sense of mixing, of what that means. So the final stage in any production is mastering. We have a mastering facility here, and it's a different sense. There's a different sense of looking at an album and looking at a production. You sort of walk away from the fact that you can change the volume and do anything you want with every track. You're now down to 2 tracks, just what's coming out of your speakers, and you're working with the overall sound. So mastering really becomes a different sensibility and a different way of listening, because when you're mixing, you're sitting there thinking of all the things you can do with changing every little piece of things, and you're sort of stepping back, looking at it as a whole, getting deep into each section, stepping back. In mastering, you can only look at things as really a whole, and it has to do with the overall professional touch, the sheen, the final gloss that's put on it. And it also has to do with how things flow together and how things work. You know, in the day of a record, which still exists, but you know, when things are compartmentalized so much in songs, you know, mastering can be looked at a little bit differently. When you're actually looking at a listening environment of an album, where you listen to songs that flow into each other and how they're meant to be played back to back, that's another artistic approach that can be really interesting when you're looking at mastering. So today we need to look at both senses. That you know, we always have a single that is exclusively by itself, but it's really great when you can actually look at a piece that's going to work together musically, kind of like a film or an opera or something where there's components that all work together. So mastering is really making sure everything fits tight together and works.